Hi, everybody, all the members of the session, particularly those that missed the meeting last month, the July session meeting, or those who were at the meeting and would just like to have a little refresher. This is basically the PowerPoint for our strategic conversation that we had about Sunday mornings that we are going to continue at the August session meeting tomorrow. And wanted to kind of save some time by bringing you all up to speed on what we shared last time. So if you look at Oakland Presbyterian Church, our largest rate of participation is on Sunday mornings. That's when the most people are participating in the life of the church. That's approximately 135 people per week out of an estimate of 210 total active participants. So 64% of our folks on average are there each and every Sunday. And not only is that got the largest rate of participation, but it's also the time when we have the largest cluster of regular activities in a single time slot. So on Sunday mornings from early till noon and past noon a little bit. We have 2 worship services. We have music group rehearsals. We have Sunday school. We have kids church. We have fellowship time. And in addition to that, Sunday morning, lunchtime, early afternoon is an attractive time for occasional events like congregational meetings, fellowship events, children's ministry events, newcomer socials, and also committee meetings sometimes take advantage of having everybody there on Sunday. So it's just a fact that this is an important time in our church's life, in our church's schedule, our membership schedule. So how can we then look at that in light of what's happening sort of culturally within particularly the American church? Well, in terms of the statistics, 20% of Americans attend church every week. That's according to Gallup. About 2/3 of Americans associate themselves with Christianity, but 20% of Americans are actually in church on a weekly basis. 41% of Americans attend sometime in a month, within 30 days, if not more. And then 57% of Americans seldom or never attend a religious service. And you probably already know that regular church attendance has steadily declined since the turn of the century. We are in a decline, and it really cuts across all denominations, all socioeconomic groups. 39% of millennials, which is sometimes a group that we talk about as exiting the church significantly. Actually, the numbers for millennials who attend church on a weekly basis is up to 39%, which was 21% in 2019. So it's sort of a misnomer that it's a millennials, or a Gen Y problem of lack of church attendance. It's actually higher rates of decline in Generation X and the baby boomer generation. They had previously been more faithful in attendance than their younger counterparts, but now they are starting to fall away. There's probably a lot of reasons for that, but they aren't attending as often. While many individual American congregations may be experiencing growth, the church in America is shrinking in size. And like I said, non-denominational churches are seeing noticeable growth, with 6.5 million more people attending a non-denominational church in 2020 than 10 years ago. I took a look at Lifeway Research, which is the Southern Baptist Church, which, by the way, is also experiencing decline in overall average worship attendance. And they have an excellent research arm called Lifeway Research. And these are some of the conclusions that they are reaching, the Southern Baptists are reaching about what's happening in regard to Sunday mornings. First, while societal patterns have definitely been shifting, Still, the vast majority of people still feel that corporate worship services should be on the Sabbath day, which for many Christians, of course, is Sunday. The origin of the 11 o'clock worship time, which for a long time was the most popular time to have worship. So, for instance, if you had a church that had one worship service, there was a really good chance you had your worship service at 11. If you had multiple worship services, one of them was probably going to be at 11. What's interesting is the roots of that actually goes back to more of an agrarian economy, where services needed to start late in the morning so farmers could do their chores beforehand. And so there's rising evidence that the 11 o'clock worship service is no longer prime time for a majority of churches. Actually, earlier Sunday morning services are gaining in popularity. Worship services with start times from 7 o'clock to 8:30 a.m. are a growing segment in terms of worship attendance. And this trend seems to be related to the growth of empty nest baby boomers. So while baby boomers are starting to fall away from the church, empty nest baby boomers are finding that the earlier the better, and then they can go to church and then have more of their day. Of course, it's a little bit different with young families. They typically need the service to be later. And so the most popular worship times start between 9:30 and 10:30. That's kind of the new prime time for church services. That's when the most people tend to be going to church. This mid-morning worship time attracts attendees in church with both single and multiple worship services. Ellison research adds, in terms of the trends that are happening overall in worship, is that 51% of all churches have worship services that are becoming more contemporary. So the question was, are you becoming more or less contemporary? And of those that were surveyed, 51% they're becoming more contemporary. And that was 38% was for churches with less than 100 people. So the bigger you get, the more likely you are to be leaning into contemporary worship. What's interesting in contrast is, of those that were surveyed, 5% of the churches said they have worship services that are becoming more traditional. So that's not quite as big a number as 51% that are leaning more contemporary. So that's a trend that we've known about, of course, but it is continuing. One interesting place I looked was the Unstuck Church Report that you can search for on Google. They are saying that every trend we're seeing is that growing churches are finding more future growth potential in contemporary worship rather than traditional worship. Churches are finding that traditional services commonly reach older generations, and older folks tend to prefer earlier service times. Before 9 a.m. is challenging for younger kids and families, younger families with kids. So that's not a huge surprise. Again, going back to Lifeway, some more research they're doing says that 5% of churchgoers say they would find a new church if their current church changed its worship style. So often we tend to conflate, and this maybe goes back to the worship wars, the upset that people are going to feel if we make changes to what's happening on Sunday morning. And actually, while people can be upset, it's not that they're going to leave the church because of it more often than not. Some will. You always have people that leave because of changes that you make. That happens pretty consistently, but not as many as we think. Another just interesting little factoid is that according to the Barner Group, 44% of millennials, going back to them, who attend church do so. So this younger generation does so. Their main reason, 27% is, 44%, it's to be closer to God. 27% to learn about God, 22% because of the Bible's teaching about worship on the Sabbath, 13% so kids can learn about God, 5% because friends are there. So this is a shift from the baby boomer generation where the value of having kids learn about God, so that's why your family goes to church, that was much, much higher. with the baby boomer generation. With the young generations emerging now, that's not so much of a huge factor. Mostly it's about personal, spiritual growth and life. And of course, they want their kids to be experiencing the same thing. It's just not so much that they're doing it just because the kids, if that makes any sense. So some questions for discussion, and I'll kind of go through what we talked about last time, and we'll go through these questions again tomorrow night. And that is basically to do some assessments of what we're doing now. Since it's such an important time, let's take a moment to just ask ourselves the question, are we taking full advantage of it? Are there ways that we can improve the Sunday morning experience to be able to reach more people and to help the church, sustain itself better? So what are the advantages of what we're doing now? And what are the disadvantages? So think about that a little bit before our meeting. What's unique about OPC's particular cultural context and how that impacts Sunday morning? We're in the South. We're in a place that tends to have seasonal folks that are coming in and coming out. What are some things about our cultural context that impacts the Sunday morning experience, not just for us, but other churches that are around us? Here's a good one. If you were starting a new church today, what would Sunday morning look like? If you had a blank slate, how would you put that together? And then we're going to go through some scenarios tomorrow night and get some feedback about how you feel about these scenarios. So I don't have a slide for that. I'm just going to read them out, but we'll have an exercise where we kind of respond to each of these. The first scenario is that we keep the current Sunday morning format schedule with no changes. The next is that we would have one worship service on Sunday morning. The third scenario is that we would switch the services so that the traditional is in the earlier time slot and the contemporary is in the later. So that would be a switch of what we do now. The fifth scenario is that we would keep two distinct services but shorten the time gap between them so that there's more overlap between both sets of worship, more connection than we experience right now. And then the sixth scenario kind of goes along with the fifth scenario, and that is that we would eliminate a designated education hour between the services and have classes or kids' church be concurrent with the worship services. So, for instance, if there is a Sunday school class, most of the people come ahead of time to the 8:45 service, then they would meet during the 11 o'clock service. If folks want to do their Sunday school early, then they would come during the 8:45 service, and then you understand, I mean, the first service and then the second service, they would go to worship. And that would work better, of course, if there's a shorter time gap between the two services. But again, these aren't actual choices. I mean, we're not making decisions. We're just responding and reacting to these scenarios based on what we're learning about our own church, about our own sense of call and mission, and also what the culture around us is teaching us about how to best connect with people with this awesome experience that we have on Sunday mornings.